First of all, we believe in consistency of legal principles, and the law needs to be applied fairly. The rule of law means that nobody's above the law. And maybe 2 points to make here. You've talked about the sentencing for the riots. Let's take as a starting point that disruption, delay is a serious thing. People need to be held to account for it. During the riots, people were not simply delayed in traffic. Communities were terrified. People were afraid to leave their houses. The damage that has been done to communities is going to last for a long, long time. That fear is going to be with communities for a long, long time. So there's a real question here, isn't there? When the sentences have ranged between 2 months and the top that you just mentioned there, 40 months, how is that proportionate? There's a second question. We're talking about delays to the motorways. 6th of September 22, the people who caused massive delays to the M25. 1st of April 2023, again, terrible disruption to the M25 and the A3 blocked in both directions, the M25 anti-clockwise, people missing funerals, hospital appointments. 3rd of March 24, this year, massive disruption to the M25, 5 crashes, emergency services.
Sorry, what is the point you're trying to make, taking me through past incidents on various roads?
The people responsible for those delays, that massive disruption, the people missing appointments haven't been held to account at all. The people responsible for the massive flooding that is getting worse and worse and is causing profound disruption to the infrastructure of this country, meaning our wheat crop is failing, people are losing their homes.
If we can just come back to the sentences that are handed out to the rioters, while I take on board your point, it was relatively limited, horrific for the people of Rotherham or Southport or Plymouth, I'm absolutely with you, but relatively limited to the town centre or the port, wherever the hotel or wherever it happened. When you block the M25 for 3 days, the impact is, you don't count it in the tens, you count it in the hundreds of thousands of people affected, way above anything you saw in Rotherham or Liverpool.
But when we've talked about those delays to the M25 caused by flooding attributable to carbon emissions,
yeah, but we haven't got the water. We haven't got the water company bosses in the dock or whatever it is. We've got people. We've got people who led an army of 48 people to shut down what. And there are specific laws, as you'll be aware, that if you close down parts of what's called the infrastructure, that attracts greater sentences, and that's what they did, and that's why they're doing their time. And most people, I think, celebrate it.
But if we're concerned about the rule of law, Nick, and it being applied evenly and equally, and the rich and the powerful not being above the law, why aren't we holding to account the fossil fuel bosses who have lied to the public?
But that's a whole separate. But that's a whole separate conversation. I thought we were going to talk about the fact that the rioters are getting what I believe you will think is shorter terms or more lenient terms than the 5 who are doing time for the the M25 closure. That's what I thought we were going to talk about.
Well, I think we should talk about both of these things if we're talking about consistency.
And I've told you why you're wrong. I've told you why you're wrong, because hundreds of thousands of people were affected by the M25, and I am not for one moment minimising what people of Plymouth and Southport and Rotherham went through, but it's relatively contained compared to closing down the M25. You must understand that, Mr. Crosland.
Well, I think that's a point of view. I think there'd be lots of people in this country.
It's not a point of view, is it? No, it's a point of accuracy, Mr. Crosland. If you can't see that closing down the M25, again, not minimising what happened in Rotherham, is a far greater scale.
I think in terms of the legal grounds, the situation they're facing is slightly difficult. Last year, there was a case very similar that went up to the Court of Appeal, also concerning Just Stop Oil protesters. And those protesters who also blocked off a gantry and tried to obstruct the motorways for several days were sentenced to periods in jail of between 3 or just under 3 and just over 3 years. And their grounds of appeal were what I presume will be very similar to Roger Hallam's and the other 4 who were convicted. And there the Court of Appeal said that the sentences weren't manifestly excessive and they weren't inconsistent with the right to protest under the European Convention on Human Rights or the right to freedom of expression. So in terms of legal grounds, I think they are going to be struggling unless they can find a persuasive way to or facts that will change the position of the Court of Appeal.
It's probably not a very healthy practice, is it, trying to compare sentencings for whatever might be one sort of crime with another sort of crime? I would imagine it's ridden with holes.
Yes. I mean, if they're hoping to go down the route of looking at the protesters and the rioters, if the protesters are hoping to go down the route of looking at the rioters and the sentences they have had, I mean, first, it's a little bit of a case of false equivalence. The actions of the rioters over the past few weeks have been morally really egregious and very upsetting and indefensible. But they are all convicted under different offences to what the Just Stop Oil protesters were convicted under, which is public nuisance. And it's also worth bearing in mind that when it comes to the rioters who have been sentenced so far, almost all of them have been in the magistrates' courts. And I think some of the upper sentences have been in the Crown Court, the one that you mentioned, for 40 months earlier. And also that they've all pled guilty, so they're going to receive an immediate benefit of a third off their sentence.
Yes, I'm very close to the M25. It's literally, I would say, 1 minute's drive away from where I live.
Oh, gosh, right. Do you remember when they closed it a couple of years ago?
I certainly do.
Right.
I certainly do. And, do you know, these people have no respect for the community at all.
Well, they would say they're trying to save the community, Pam.
No. Listen, if they want to protest, do it. Do it in a sensible way, a reasonable way. Do it where you do not disrupt members of the public. I've worked for the NHS. Okay. Now, the surgery that I work at, if you're late, you have to make the time up or you lose your money.
You mean as staff now, obviously, not for appointments?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So if I'm 3 hours late, that costs me 3 hours money. Okay.
Yep.
For these protesters to do what they're doing.
But they would say, lastly, Pam, if we don't take this action, there won't be doctors, you won't have any work, it will be a planet that comes to an end, is what they would say, Pam.
Right. Look, this I appreciate. I'm not saying that these Just Stop Oil protesters, shouldn't, maybe I agree with what they're saying. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with what they're doing and the way that they are protesting. They need to do it. What is the point of blocking the M25, stopping people from getting to work, going about their business, stopping people getting appointments? These, there could be fatalities because of this.
Well, they were saying that your man got 5 years for attending a Zoom call.
Yes.
Well, if they'd have caught Hitler, he could say, well, all I did was give speeches and attend meetings with my generals. I just had, I never actually threw anybody in a gas chamber.
Right. I mean, I think comparing Just Stop Oil to the Nazis is a bit of a stretch, John. But to your central point is, you think he deserved his 5 years, is what you're saying.
He was orchestrating the whole thing. Doesn't matter whether it was on a phone call or on a Zoom call or whatever. It was the planning and the orchestrating of it.
What about the idea we look at it the other way, that we're not giving the rioters enough?
Well, the laws are in place to say this is what you get if you do that.
Yeah,
there are sentencing guidelines for that.
Well, let's have a look. Let's see what the maximum term could be for violent disorder. I'm waving at a colleague who's going to try and look that up. And I would guess, for instance, maximum term of possession of a weapon, John, is going to be more than 2 years, 8 months, and yet that's what one bloke, I'm looking down the charge sheet now, sorry, the convictions, not just charge sheet, the convictions, possession of a weapon, to me, is worth more than 2 years, 8 months. Lastly, John?
I'm not the expert in that sort of thing. That's
here we go, I've just been told. Right, 5 years maximum for violent disorder. So these people could have got 5. They're getting 3 years, 2 years, 8 months. What's this one? 2 years, 5 months, and so on and so forth. I think it comes back to the idea, I was spookily correct, everyone gets 5 years.
You can do, but then is it first offence or second offence? Yeah. There's leniency. Right.
Maximum term for possession of offensive weapon is 4 years. This guy got, what did he get? 2 years, 8 months. We look at it the other way.